I'm an OCR GCSE psychology examiner. I'm also a psychology teacher. So I'm going to do a walking talking mock with you now where I break down every single question in a real past paper and we get you as many marks as we can in that exam, because I'm going to be explaining to you exactly the sort of thing that I'm looking for as an actual examiner of the real papers coming up this summer. Let's get into it. Now, although you don't have to for this video at all, it might be worth you downloading and trying the paper yourself first. I've put a link to the OCR website where you can download the paper for free on the screen with a QR code, otherwise it's in the description as well. If you really want to push yourself, give yourself 90 minutes to do it, just like the real paper. Now, let's get started. So in this video, we're going to break down the 2021 paper and we're going to get started with some multiple choice questions, and we're going to get straight into one of my top tips, and that is to cross out answers that you know are wrong. Let me give you an example. So on this first page, we can see different types of crime that might be associated with murder for 1A. Now, if you think about it and you break some of these questions down, let's say we know that it's not drug related, okay? Drug related crimes, they're not going to be murder. Let's cross that out. Let's do the same for C, sexual crimes. Again, we don't think that's going to be associated with murder. And let's say we're a little bit unsure whether it's A or D. By crossing out answers that we know are wrong, we're giving ourselves a 50% chance of at least getting the answer right. And obviously, hopefully, once we see violent or antisocial, even if we're a bit unsure, we'll hopefully lean towards violent and get ourselves the mark there. Now for B, an acquisitive crime is anything where you gain something. I would go for robbery for that one as the right answer. Now, even if you didn't know that, again, we can maybe use the answers to number 1A to try and help us out with 1B. So for example, rape, that's probably a sexual crime, so we can get rid of that. Assault would be considered a violent crime. And then we've got graffiti and robbery. And if we're not sure about them, again, if we've crossed out two answers, at least we've got a nice little 50-50 there. Obviously, assault would be considered violent, graffiti would be considered an antisocial crime. So from there, we can work out that it's robbery. For C, the answer would be that different cultures identify different behaviours as criminal. A social construct is anything made up by that society. So for example, queuing is a social construct as well. Some cultures like to queue, some cultures don't queue. And so in this case, crime is a social construct. In some cultures, things like homosexuality is a crime. In other cultures, things like euthanasia might be a crime or might not be a crime. So we've got some examples there of how crime can be a social construct. Let's move on to the second page now. Explain one way in which Cooper and Mackey's study into video games and aggression in children could be improved. Now, what's really important here, and here's my second big tip of the day, is that one is written in bold. Now, if one's written in bold, that means do not give more than one. If you give more than one, as an examiner, I have to stop marking at the first point that you have made. You can see that this first example looks really good. It definitely looks like 3 marks worth. However, I have to stop marking at this point. And that's because, unfortunately, you've waffled into 2 or 3 limitations. And so you'll only get 1 mark. What we're after is just 1 limitation well explained. So a limitation of Cooper and Mackey's study might be, and I think this is probably the best one, something we call low ecological validity. That's because Cooper and Mackey's study took part in a lab environment. And so if it's in a lab environment, we know it's not going to be realistic for the children who are taking part in this study. Really, they wouldn't be playing video games in a lab. They'd be playing video games at home, in bed, whatever, right? Or in arcades probably at that time. And so when we're doing our experiment in a lab, it's not going to be as natural. That would be a great one for 3 marks. Now, let's move on to question 3. Question 3 gives you a 4 marker to outline 2 criticisms of the social learning theory. Nature-nurture would be a great one. Social learning theory definitely supports nurture a little bit too much. That's because it only focuses on our environment. It doesn't take into account anything to do with our biology, our genes, anything along those lines. It's just you see somebody getting away with a crime, you want to become a criminal. It's not really always the case. That's going to be my first point. My second point, and again, for 4 marks, we're giving a point and we're explaining it in a little bit more detail. My second point would be something along the lines of explaining the fact that, well, if social learning theory explains that we only gain our criminal behaviours through observing other criminals, where did the first criminal come from? And that will finish it up for all 4 marks. Now for question 4, and the answer to this one is 15.7, and let me tell you how I got to that. So we simply add up all of the scores and then divide them by how many scores there are. So in this case, there are 6 scores, adding them all up together first, and then we're dividing them by 6. And that brings us to 15.6 reoccurring. And so if we're going to round it up, which we do want to, it'll be 15.7.
Okay, let's get on to question 5, and this is where it gets quite tricky, I'll admit. A little bit of revision though, and we can smash a 5 marker like this. So let's have a look at it. Describe the neuropsychology involved in psychoticism and extroversion. We've got ourselves a pretty tough 5 marker, but actually there's a lot to write about here. So let's see what we can discuss. Now, the word neuropsychology does come up on almost every paper every year at least once. It's important you understand that the word neuropsychology means biology, and how does that biological aspect affect our psychology, our mental state, our behavior, our personality. So firstly, for 5 marks, I'd be trying to basically turn it into a 6 marker in a way and write 3 marks worth for each of the 2. So psychoticism. Psychoticism is caused by an overactive dopamine reward system. That means that people who are psychotic, they crave rewards and they don't care what they have to do to try and get those rewards. Extroversion, I would say, is a little bit trickier.
This is caused by a reticular activating system that filters out too much information from its environment. You could also word it as being underactive. It's not letting in enough arousal from the environment. What that means is that criminals, according to Weizsäcker, really crave that stimulation from their environment. That's what extroverts are. They want that excitement from their environment.
The problem here is that sometimes people who are extroverted, they can sometimes satisfy those cravings with normal things. Things like going on roller coasters. However, for people who are criminals, unfortunately for them, they need some extra stimulation, something a bit more extreme. And in this case, we're talking about criminal behavior.
Now, this is a topic that's way too complicated for me to summarise in just 1 minute, so it's definitely worth checking out the full Weizsäcker video on my channel if you're struggling.
So next we move on to question 6. Question 6 is a source-based question, and that brings me to my next massive top tip, which is making use of the source. It's so important whenever you get given a source to refer to the source constantly. It can be the difference in a question like this, which is worth 6 marks in total, between getting 6 out of 6 and 2 or 3 out of 6. It's really, really important. So let's get on with it and see what I mean. So Asmi has been caught dealing drugs at their college and the police have been contacted. Asmi has admitted to doing this on a number of occasions and has a lot of drugs in their possession in their home. Using the source, explain one way in which punishment could be used with Asmi to try and stop their involvement with drugs. So we're talking about punishment here, and that should hopefully ring some alarm bells that we're looking at either prisons, fines, or community sentencing. And so out of those 3, we've got to pick one that's appropriate, and as long as you justify why that's appropriate, then you'll get yourself the marks here. So for this, you could say something like, maybe I would give Asmi some fines, and this would stop him from wanting to go and commit the crime again, because hopefully it would mean that they would not want to then get another fine. So it's a deterrent. Now, the most important thing here, and the thing that students really struggle with, or maybe they get too excited in the exam, they go, yeah, I know the answer, so I'm just going to scribble down as quickly as I can, is that they forget to talk about the source. So they forget to reference Asmi, or they forget to reference the fact that they have lots of drugs in their possession in their home, or that they deal drugs at college. Let's be specific, and if you want to make sure you get the marks, quote the source. So my big top tip is to actually reference the source, quote the source throughout your entire exam. Make sure that any sources that you get, you refer to them in that question. It's really, really important. And we keep that up for part B. Again, explain one way in which rehabilitation could be used with Asmi to try and stop their involvement with drugs. Well, in order to get rehabilitation going on, we need to be using either restorative justice or the use of positive role models. They're the 2 that are named on the spec. So for this, I probably wouldn't go down restorative justice being when the perpetrator meets the victim of their crime. I'd probably go down the route of talking about use of positive role models. So for example, I would pair Asmi up with somebody who has a history of dealing drugs or some involvement in the drug world, and make sure that this person is a positive role model, somebody who's maybe moved on from that and has found successes in a legitimate way. This might show Asmi that, you know, they aren't trapped in that lifestyle of constantly doing drugs. They can actually make it elsewhere. As I said, the most important thing here by far is making use of the source. I can't stress it enough. The amount of marks that students lose by not referring to the source, not talking about the specific names or the people or the places that the questions are referring to, it costs you so many marks. I'd argue 10 to 15 marks in an entire paper is just for referring to sources. That's like 2 grade boundaries. So next we come on to section B, which is development. And again, we're going to follow that routine of crossing out ones that we know are wrong. It's a great tip and it's going to help you out to make sure that you're not making any silly mistakes in the real exam. So, a weakness of Piaget's study. I mean, if we're looking at these four, the one that we can really definitely rule out is C. It only included children under the age of 5. We know that's definitely not true because, again, the whole point of the study is that we're comparing children in the pre-operational stage versus the concrete operational stage, and that's a variety of ages, so we're definitely not going to have C. That brings it down to either A, B or D if you don't know the answer. The right answer is B. It only included children from one culture. They were all from Switzerland, Geneva to be precise. But if you don't know that, again, crossing out wrong answers that you know are wrong helps you just narrow down the chances of getting it wrong. And so if we move on to B, identify which of the following is a weakness of the task used in Piaget's study. Well, it was a very artificial task, wasn't it? If we think about it, moving counters across and knowing which one had more counters is going to be a real weakness of the study. It's not a very realistic situation for people to be in. And finally, if we get on to C, identify which of the following was a weakness of the procedure in the study. Well, he did ask the same question twice. Again, though, if we were to look at the other ones, he helped the children with the task. He didn't help the children, so we can cross that one out. He used counters rather than other objects. Well, Piaget technically did more than one study into conservation. He actually did 7. The only one that you need to know is called conservation of number. So he did technically use other objects in his other studies, so that can't really be a criticism. And so that leaves us with just A or B, and he did ask the same question twice, so that's going to be the criticism. He said, which one has more counters, and then he would do it again and go, okay, now which one has more counters after spreading them out? Well, that could confuse some younger children into going, well, something must have changed. I can't give the same answer twice. That's going to be your answer for C. Let's move on to question 8, and again, another source-based question. So again, another thing where we have to be quoting the source, referring to the source. Now, this is quite a hefty source, so I'm not going to waste time and read it out. If you want to read it, please pause it. Otherwise, we'll get straight into it with question A. Name the stage of cognitive development that Sam is in. Well, Sam is very clearly in the pre-operational stage, and the dead giveaway is that first sentence. Straight away it says Sam is 3 years old. Now, that's a giveaway because the sensory motor stage is 0 to 2 years old, the pre-operational stage is 2 to 7 years old. So straight away, that's a bit of a giveaway. So if we move on to B, name the twin who demonstrates decentration. Well, this is going to be Alex, and the reason is because Alex can deal with 2 perspectives at the same time. Being able to deal with 2 things at the same time is known as decentration. Decentration also refers to the idea that they're able to look at other people's perspectives, so not just stick to their own, and they are able to get over what we call egocentrism. So decentration would be Alex that is demonstrating it. For C, state the concept of cognitive development that Kai shows with their toys. Well, the answer here is animism. Animism is where you pretend or believe that inanimate objects are still alive or that they are real. And so animism would be the answer here because it says that Kai still has toys that are their make-believe friends, and they get very upset if anyone hurts them. Well, this idea of being able to hurt toys, it demonstrates animism. It's the idea that the toys are actually alive and they can feel pain. For D, give the phrase that demonstrates the concept of egocentrism. Well, egocentrism is the idea that you are the center of the universe. You can't put yourself in other people's perspectives, in other people's shoes. And so the answer would be that Kai, however, still only sees things from their point of view. That suggests that Kai is very egocentric. They still believe they're the center of the universe. It's a bit of a phrase that I like to use there. And finally, for E, give one example of something that Taylor can do that their siblings might not be able to do. Well, Taylor's much older, clearly in the formal operational stage. And in the formal operational stage, there's a few options that you could go for. Best ones being things like abstract thinking, being able to think about really complex thoughts, being able to have debates, anything along those lines would get you the marks. And so in order to smash question 8, really, it's just about the understanding of the key terms of Piaget's theory. And this is a bit of a trend with a lot of the theories. If you know the key terms, you get through most of the questions. So question 9 then. A psychologist asked a group of students the following question: what's your preferred learning style? Now, for this one, we're talking about making a pie chart, and I'm not going to get into the maths of this necessarily. I'll just show you what we're looking for here in terms of the answer. However, the one thing I really want us to know, and this is going to be another one of my top tips, is to make sure that you understand that anything that is based on making a table or graph or chart or anything along those lines in psychology at GCSE, half of the marks are often for just writing the labels and a title. Now that means that even if you are really stuck, you're really struggling, you don't know how to do the pie chart, you're not sure if you're going to get the marks for maybe getting the data correct, well, as long as you have the correct labels and the correct title, you're going to get yourself at least some of the marks. Now, even if we only get 2 out of the 4 marks here because we've put our title and our labels, we're happy because, you know, we came into this question unsure, not sure how to do the pie chart, and so we've got 2 marks out of a question that we weren't really sure about. So remember, anything based on a table or chart or graph, a lot of marks are often based on just writing a title and coming up with the labels and putting the labels correctly on there. So please do remember that. There's some easy marks to get. Now we're going to breeze through B and C. So B is closed questions, and for C it's no preference. So no preference being the modal category, mode being the most common. Just one thing to note, mode, median and mean, they are what we call measures of central tendency. This is something that some of my students didn't know, and they understand what mode, median and mean are, but they don't know that they're called measures of central tendency. And in an exam, I think it was the 2023 paper, it came up as a question, which measure of central tendency would you use? And it threw loads of students out. So if you ever get that question, measures of central tendency, it's talking about mean, median and mode. Next, we come on to question 10. And personally, if I was a student, I'd look at a question like this and absolutely love it. But I do feel like a lot of my students can get quite intimidated by a big 6 marker. Here, we need to evaluate Blackwell study. And for 6 marks, that means we really want at least 3 evaluations well explained. There's loads that we could choose from. We could go for culture bias here, which is the fact that Blackwell only used students from America, from 2 schools in America in both of the studies. We could also use what we call low population validity. There weren't many of them, certainly not enough to generalize around the world. We could use the fact that actually they only used math scores. Now that's a really good one for Blackwell. They only looked at maths tests. Now if we're only looking at maths tests, that's not really going to be representative of all intelligence, you know, intelligence in science or English or just general intelligence. So that's a huge limitation of the study. So there's 3 right there. If you fully explain them, that's going to get you 6 marks. Other things include the fact that they used a longitudinal design. That means that it was done over a long period of time. Could be a strength because you can get a lot of detail out of a study like that. And another strength could be the fact that it has what we call high ecological validity. So this is the idea that because it was done in a natural environment, that these students are going to act very naturally. So I've put up a brief bullet point list here, but in the real exam, you'd want to actually explain these properly in a big paragraph or a couple of big paragraphs, or after 3 points, 3 evaluation points, well explained, and you'll get yourself the marks. You could technically get the marks by doing 2, but let's just make sure and write 3. And finally for this section, question 11, we've got Dweck's theories. So outline how Dweck's mindset theory may be applied in education. Firstly, I saw loads of my students getting Dweck and Piaget mixed up. Please make sure you get them the right way around. It's a really common thing I see all of the time. They are very different. Dweck's mindset theory says that students have got a growth or a fixed mindset. Growth being that they embrace challenges, fixed being that they shy away from challenges and they don't like the idea of having a difficult time. Now that will get you 1 mark straight away for saying that. And for explaining that teachers should be trying to encourage a growth mindset. That's going to get you another mark. Again, it's been found through studies, Blackwell et al., that having a growth mindset improves your academic ability. For the final 2 marks, we should be talking about what we call praise for effort. Anyone who's watched Dweck's TED Talk will know that Dweck is obsessed with praising for effort. That means that instead of teachers praising because someone got a level 9 in their exam, we should be saying things like, well done, I can see that you've worked really hard on that paper. I can see that you've tried hard in your revision. Really lovely revision notes there. I can see you've really been working hard. These are all examples of praising for effort, which is what Dweck says develops more of a growth mindset. So mention that and mention it in the context of education, and you're going to get yourself all 4 marks.
Now we're halfway through the video, and if you're finding it useful, it might be worth you sharing it with somebody who also might benefit from the video, and liking and subscribing is the best way to show me that you're finding it helpful.
Right, let's get on with section C then. So section C starts off with multiple choice again, and again, we've got to be crossing out ones that are wrong. I'll go over these a little bit quicker. So the ABC model stands for activating event, beliefs, and consequences. And again, what you need to be doing is going through, seeing things that you know aren't right and crossing them out. If you know the answer, that's great. Don't worry about it, get it done and move on. But if you don't, then crossing them out is a really good way to secure those marks. Now, question 13 is a tricky one. I'd argue probably the trickiest question and a bit of a curveball really, because we have a 6 mark marker, all based on the key concepts of psychological problems. Now, describing how attitudes towards mental health have changed since the 1959 Mental Health Act. Again, for 6 marks, we're probably after 3 important points well explained. So let me give you some examples of some points you could use. Firstly, mental health has now been treated much more similarly to physical health. So we're treating it with much more respect, and people are able to go to doctors and treat mental health illnesses in a similar way, rather than being locked away in asylums like they used to be before the 1950s. There's also much more of a focus in what we call care in the community. So what this is rather than trying to treat people by taking them to asylums or mental hospitals or institutions, we're actually trying to treat people in the community, which means that we're treating people in their home so that it has as least amount of disruption to their lives as possible. Further things include things like more rights for people with mental health disorders. For example, it's now illegal to discriminate against people who have a mental health disorder, and also the fact that we're trying to use less stigmatized labels. We're not going to start calling people insane or mental or anything like that. We're saying that people have a disorder instead. It is a really tough answer. I've put up a bullet point list of some ideas you could talk about here, and obviously in order to get 6 marks, you'd want to expand on these and actually write them out in full. Not all of them, just 3 would probably get you enough to get the full marks. Now for the 13 marker, the big one. For this, I've got a whole 13 marker guide on my channel that should help you smash any 13 marker that comes your way. I'll give you a very brief rundown of how I would plan this 13 marker, but if you need more support with it, I've got a full length video you need to check out. So this one tasks you with talking about how biological explanations give us the best understanding of human behavior. And so you're supposed to do a little argument, including the biological explanation of schizophrenia. Now, hopefully we should know that the biological theory of schizophrenia includes the concept of what we call the dopamine hypothesis, and looking at some parts of the brain and how that has an implication in schizophrenia. Again, I'll do a full video on that at some point. But that would be my first paragraph, describing the theory that it's given us. So it's given us a theory about the biological explanation. I'd be talking about the AO1 of it, the description of that theory, using the key terms as much as I can. My second paragraph would then be an AO3 of that theory. However, I would make sure to be constantly linking to the statement. The statement is, biological explanations give us the best understanding of human behavior. Well, in which case, my AO3 has to be a discussion of that point. Are biological explanations best or not? Well, let's talk about the fact that the biological explanation of schizophrenia is really reductionist. What we mean by that is it takes something really complex, like schizophrenia, and it simplifies it and narrows it down to just dopamine receptors and parts of the brain. What about environmental influences? What about your family? What about your upbringing? What about social status? There's so many different things that can have an effect on whether or not you're going to develop schizophrenia or not. The biological explanation does not take that into account. And so that rounds up the first half of the essay. Let's talk about the second half of the essay. Here we have to talk about a countering point. Now, yes, we could technically use another biological theory explanation and then give another AO3. You could do that, but for the most effective 13 markers, I always find that having a debate, having 2 sides of an argument is going to be best. So if our first half of the essay was talking about a biological theory, our second half of the essay should be about a non-biological theory. And so a really good one to talk about here, I think, would be social learning theory. That would be our second AO1 paragraph. So a description of social learning theory, bringing in those key terms like vicarious reinforcement, learning through observation, role models, imitation, all of that stuff. And really a discussion about how much it doesn't use biology. In terms of your AO3, I would then be talking about, well, what's a strength or weakness of that, or give a couple. So in this case, I'd be saying that a couple of weaknesses. So one, because it doesn't use biology, it doesn't look into nature at all. It's way too nurture based. So it focuses too much on nurture and ignores the role of nature. I know this sounds like a similar point to the previous one, but actually it's using a separate debate. Now, this is really important, guys. It's really important that we do not use the same point twice. Let me give you an example. In our first AO3 paragraph, you can see that we have used the concept of reductionism. Technically, social learning theory is also reductionist, but I don't want to make that same point again. If I make the same point twice, I will get what's called an REP put next to that paragraph. REP standing for repeated or repetition. And so what that means is that we can't give you more marks for making the same point again. Even if you've used it in a different way, you've said that it's reductionist for a different reason, doesn't matter. You won't get the same marks again. So please remember, when you are working out what you're going to write in your exam, in your essay, that you are working out, okay, listen, I'm not going to use reductionist on the second one. I'm going to make sure that I'm using a variety of AO3 points. So what would I use? As I say, nature nurture would be a really good one. I could also debate the fact that actually by taking a non-biological route, the social learning theory is much less scientific. It's much harder to prove to be right, and so arguably it could be a little bit more subjective. And actually, if I wanted to talk about subjectivity, maybe I'll talk about the Freudian theory instead. So if I wanted to do that instead, and this is a different route that you could take to do this 13 marker, you'd still have the first same two paragraphs, which is the AO1 on the biological explanation of schizophrenia, and the AO3. But then my second half of the essay, instead of talking about social learning theory, I could talk about the Freudian theory of dreaming, about latent content, manifest content as that AO1. And then the AO3 would focus on the fact that because the Freudian theory does not look at biology, it is way more subjective. I think we can all agree that the Freudian theory is pretty weird at the best of times, and it isn't very scientific at all. That makes it a very limited explanation. It's nowhere near as scientific or provable as a biological explanation is. So I've given you two potential routes for 13 markers here, two plans that you could use, and either of them would get you full marks in this essay if written in the correct way, and you put a little conclusion at the end as well. If you need more support on the 13 marker, please don't forget I've got a full in-depth guide on how to nail 13 markers on the channel. Please do go take a look at that. Finally, we come on to research methods. And again, I will do a full video on research methods, but for now, there's one really important thing that you need to know. You need to make sure that you are constantly referring to the source at the start of the research methods section. So throughout all of research methods, which is worth 18 marks, you are going to be expected to refer to the small block of information that's at the start of the first page. It is so important that you are constantly referring to this. Even if you're not sure that it's worth anything in the question that you're answering, just don't take a risk, write about the study that is written in this first little bit here. First thing you need to notice, you have been asked to carry out a correlation. To very briefly explain, a correlation is not the same as an experiment. It's really important that you know that. A correlation does not actually have any experimentation. If I wanted to carry out a correlation, I wouldn't be doing any experimenting. I wouldn't be manipulating anything. I wouldn't be doing anything. Actually, correlations can't even establish what we call cause and effect. All correlations do is they tell us that as one thing goes up, the other one goes up, or as one thing goes up, the other one goes down, or so on and so forth. Let me give you an example. Did you know that the popularity of the first name Jordan correlates perfectly with robberies in South Carolina? Now, does that mean that we have loads of people called Jordan who are going around stealing from South Carolina? And the less Jordans there are, the less of those Jordans are going around robbing the banks? No, there might not be a link there at all. However, as we can see, if we put the numbers next to each other, there's a clear correlation there between names of people who are called Jordan and the amount of robberies. Therefore, although we have a relationship, we understand that as one goes down, the other one goes down as well. We can't establish what we call cause and effect. We don't know that one variable causes the other variable. And so for that reason, we just call them covariables. We don't have such thing as an independent variable or a dependent variable in a correlation. And so that leads us on nicely to question 16, which asks us to identify the two covariables in this investigation. So what is the investigation? Well, we've been asked to carry out a correlation to investigate whether there is a relationship between how much exercise people do and how happy they are. The theory is that the more exercise people do, the happier they are. Well, the only two variables that I can see on there are happiness and how much exercise they do. So we'll put that down as our answer. Based on the theory you're investigating, give the direction of correlation you would predict. This would create what we call a positive correlation. The more exercise people do, the happier they are. So if I was to put that into a very basic graph here, this is what it would look like. You can see that it's a positive correlation. As one goes up, the other goes up as well. For number 18, outline the procedure that you would use in your investigation. This is one that a lot of my students seem to struggle with. Now, in reality, it's quite straightforward. For 3 marks, you just need to identify 3 features of your study. Come up with a feasible study, one that would make sense in your head, and then use that to identify 3 features for 3 marks. So that's kind of why they give you this little planning space up here. Just a bit of advice, you actually won't get any marks for this planning box on this first page at all. In fact, most examiners probably won't even glance at it. So use that to scribble down your ideas and get some stuff on paper, but don't use it to try and get any extra marks. So what would I do here? Well, we could do something really simple, like we'd use a questionnaire to measure people's happiness levels on a scale of 1 to 10. If we did that and then gave them a second questionnaire to ask them about their exercise level, so how much they exercise per week, and then we put that on a graph, we'd be able to see if there's a correlation between happiness and exercise. So in terms of outlining the procedure of this,
I would make sure to talk about at least 3 different features of my investigation. They could be any 3. I've put a little bullet point list here. Obviously in the real exam, you'd want to write in full sentences. However, examples could be talking about how you'd collect their happiness levels using questionnaires. That's going to get you a mark. How you'd rate the questionnaires on a scale of 1 to 10. Maybe you'd collect an opportunity sample. Maybe even suggest where you'd collect the sample. There's lots of different ideas here, but write 3 points in full sentences and you'll get yourself the marks.
Okay, next for question 19, it's a really common question. In fact, it's really likely you're going to see this question in the summer in some capacity. So it's about outlining one potential ethical problem, how you're going to deal with it, and then really importantly, linking it back to the source. They're the 3 marks, 1 for identifying a problem, 1 for identifying a solution, and 1 for coming up with a contextualized answer, something that's going to mention something about exercise or happiness. They're the key terms that I'm going to be looking for. Potential answers would include something about deception being a potential problem, and using a debrief to fix that, or confidentiality and using things like code names to keep people's names confidential would work as a potential solution. Next, we come on to question 20, and that involves looking at gender bias. Now for 2 marks, we need to identify what gender bias is, how I'd resolve it within my investigation, and make sure that it's contextualized yet again. Hopefully you're starting to realize just how important those context marks are.
Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry.
So a model answer would look something like this. Name the type of graph that you would use to present the results from your investigation. Well, anytime you see a correlation, you must know that the graph has to be a scatter diagram. So that's the answer. Now for the final 2 again, you can see that they are both 3 markers and they both have the words in your investigation in there. Now, if that's the case, then we've got to make sure that we are contextualizing as always, and the first one tasks us with talking about reliability. Anytime you see a question about reliability, the main thing is that you need to be talking about consistency or repeatability. So as an examiner, I'm looking for words like that. So something about the fact that I would make sure my investigation is reliable by repeating it or by doing it first with a different group of people before my main study to make sure that my questionnaires are reliable. Something like that would make sure I get the marks. Again, making sure that I'm referring to exercise and happiness. Finally, for 23, explain one weakness of using a correlation for this investigation. For this one, it is pretty tough. In a weird way, we're sort of trying to compare using a correlation with an experiment. Remember what I said earlier, a correlation means that we as researchers don't actually manipulate any variables. So that means there's just 2 variables, they're called covariables, and we're just measuring if one goes up, does the other one go up? And that means, as I said earlier, there's no cause and effect. We don't know that that one thing causes the other thing. Remember, people called Jordan aren't going around robbing banks. However, that is a correlation, right? But that is a big weakness of a correlation. We can identify a relationship, we cannot establish cause and effect. That is always a weakness of a correlation. Final mark then is for just referring to the source. And that is all of the 2021 paper completely done. Now please leave any comments below if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to help, and likewise if you found it useful, like and subscribe. Thank you very much. See you guys in the next one.